Welcome to the IDP Plus Advice Show for Week 16. We're going to talk about snaps and playing time. We're going to talk about alignments. We're going to talk about injuries, waivers, and potential pickups. And we're going to do all that to help you advance in your fantasy playoffs. With that, let's go ahead and get started. All righty, I'm your host, Ricky Rodriguez. You can find me at RickyRod66. As we've been doing all season long, we're going to go division by division, taking through all the key parts that you need to know related to individual defensive players. And we're going to go ahead and start with the NFC North, everyone. But before we do, I do want to say thank you. We have so many loyal, repeat listeners and watchers and so forth. So I want to thank you all for continuing to engage with us. Leave your feedback and comments below. People are starting to ask more and more sit questions in the YouTube channel, which is great, but I'm only checking those through about early Thursday evening. Beyond that, you need to join our start sit show on Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. Eastern time on this same IDP Plus channel, and we'll get those answered during the start sit show. So just know that. Now, your public service announcement for this week, folks. The Chargers are playing the Broncos Thursday night, but we have two Saturday games: Houston, Kansas City at 1 Eastern, Pittsburgh and Baltimore at 4:30 Eastern. Be sure and set your lineups accordingly. And also, because of the couple of early games on Saturday, make sure and leave your flex positions open if you're going to play someone to give you the flexibility from a positioning standpoint. Now, today with 32 teams also, just want to let you know that I might not get into as many tackles and sacks now. Some of those specific type of numbers may skip through that a little bit faster so that we can get to some of the other playing time information. And with the NFC North, let's go with the Bears who played the Vikings. They played a very heavy 77 snaps, did the Bears. TJ Edwards led the team in tackles, got a sack. Tremaine Edmonds also played 100% of the snaps, just like Edwards did. The safety position was what we're worried about once Elijah Hicks came back. What would it do to the Jonathan Owens share? Well, Byard stayed at 100%, so you didn't have to worry about that. But we'll come back to him in a second. But Hicks played 45% of the snaps. Owens played 55%. So they basically had a timeshare with Hicks coming back. Of course, they were playing in that Jaquan Brisker position who went on IR from that concussion, who we don't expect back this year. So it's risky to play Hicks and or Owens as you head to week 16 from the playoffs. So be very, very careful. On the Byard front, he only had 6 tackles, 4 of which were solo. Now that's 2 weeks in a row he's had subpar tackle outings after leading the team in tackles for 4 weeks in a row. This feels like a return back to the norm. This feels like sort of like what was happening with Jeremy Chin. So maybe you get 7-8 tackles out of Byard, but don't expect those double-digit tackles that we had during that 4-week run. Okay, let's talk about the Detroit Mash unit, also known as the Detroit Lions, who lost to the Bills. The Lions lost 3 more defensive people. There were 3 defensive players, They were put on injured reserve on Tuesday. That's Aleem McNeil, Carlton Davis, Khalil Darcy. Not that you're necessarily playing any of those folks, but it's just what it means, though, is the Lions may play more total snaps on defense because they continue to lose so many players. They played 70 this week. Great news for Brian Branch, who played 100%, and Brian Branch has been letting us down the last few weeks, but this week he came back with a solid 15 tackles to lead the team, 8 of which were solo, a couple which were tackle for losses, and a pass defense. Jack Campbell, who, when we talked about him in the start set show, we talked about it here, very inconsistent in terms of efficiency of tackles. He got 100% of the snaps, and then playing that 70 snaps on the much higher side, because 3 of the past 4 weeks they played 55, 50, and 48 snaps, which is really low. This week they played a lot, He played 100%, which I expect to continue, and he did get 11 tackles, 8 solo, and a pass defense. So if there's one silver lining from all these Lions injuries from an IDP perspective, their defense may be on the field more, particularly with the David Montgomery injury on offense, which could mean Jack Campbell could produce stats that could help you. So we've talked about in the past the 4 linebackers from the Lions/MASH unit on IR: Anzalone, Barnes, Reeves Maben, and Malcolm Rodriguez. So let's talk about next to Jack Campbell what happened. Quan Alexander, 17% of the snaps after 34% the week before. Trevor Nowitzki, inactive after 64% the week before. Zeke Turner, 40% after 34% the week before. David Long, 41% from 32% previously. Ben Neiman, yes, Ben Neiman played 63% of the snaps this week after 2% last week. Jamal Adams played 17% this week. And they just signed Anthony Pittman off the Jags practice squad. I think you've probably pieced together what the net message of this is going to be. We're not playing any other linebacker other than Jack Campbell. And I do include Jamal Adams, even though he's listed as a safety. When he has been playing, he's been playing mostly in the box. So that's why I kind of lumped him there. The Lions also had no team sacks. Za'Darius Smith, who was the only quasi probably decent pass rusher they have left, he played a decent amount the first couple of games when he joined the Lions in the trade from the Browns. Last week I called out he played only 42%. This week he only played 43%, 1 assisted tackle. Can't count on Za'Darius Smith with that kind of snap count. So we're not playing any of those Lions other than you're playing Brian Branch, you're playing Campbell. I don't know if you're playing much more than that. Granted, Kirby Joseph did have 8 tackles, 6 solo, but that's not a typical Kirby Joseph game. He typically gets more of his points through the big plays. And if those aren't generating, he's going to typically hurt you from a floor perspective. Let's go to the Packers next. Against the Seahawks. The game became a bit of a blowout, so always be careful of stats when we're looking at blowouts. It creates a lot of different outliers in different ways, both on the good side and the bad side. First, they only played 59 snaps on defense. Quay Walker only played 37% of snaps before he left with an ankle injury. He is week to week. Usually when you hear week to week, that means particularly the first week, that means he's not going to be playing. So what happened when Quay Walker came out? Eric Wilson played the other 63% of the snaps at that linebacker position, that kind of Mike position, that green dot position, 37 and 63. There's the 100% between what Walker played and what Wilson played. Let's talk about Edgerrin Cooper and Isaiah McDuffie. If you watched the game and watched after, Edgerrin Cooper got one of the game balls from the NBC team. He played 58% of the snaps. Now, he played a little bit more of that later in the game as the game became a little bit of a blowout as well. Isaiah McDuffie played 42%, 58 and 42. There's your 100 again. So they were in a timeshare as well. Now, Cooper has really produced when he's played. And of course, he's just recently come back from this injury. He led the team, but on 59 snaps for the team as a total, he only had 7 tackles as a team leader, with 6 of which were solo. He got a sack, 2 tackles for loss, 2 quarterbacks for hits, 2 pass defenses, and even an interception. So, man, was he productive. Man, could I have used him in my Kings Classic lineup, which I lost out of, and I'm very disappointed because so many of my players laid an egg. I digress. Anyway, so what does that mean for the coming week? It means Eric Wilson, who will probably play the green dot, will play close to 100% of the snaps. And then you're going to probably see McDuffie and Walker sharing the other number 2 and number 3 linebacker snaps, probably both playing in that 75 to 85% range, roughly, which means both will be tough to trust in a fantasy playoff semifinal game. If I'm playing one and I need some huge upside, it is going to be Cooper. If I'm playing one and I need a floor, I'm playing McDuffie. That's how I kind of see this. Okay, let's go to the secondary. It's always interesting with the Packers. Jair Alexander, out again. They probably regret not putting him on IR because I think this is the 4th week in a row that he's missed. Javon Bullard, who usually plays in the slot, did not play at all. He was inactive. good news for you Keyshawn Nixon owners, because Nixon played 95% of the snaps, and all but I believe one of those snaps was in the slot or in the box. So very, very good for him. And that's what we want to see. That'll be even better news too when Alexander comes back, which will confirm Nixon staying in the slot with Valentine and Stokes on the outside. Valentine played 98% outside, or 98% of the snaps. Valentine played 100%, basically all on the outside. Great news. Xavier McKinney and Evan Williams both played 95% of the snaps. Zane Anderson and Keaton Oladipo played the other 5%, which again I mentioned each. Was going to mention that blowout. As a result of the blowout, McKinney and Williams sat late in the game. Evan Williams played 82% of the snaps deep. That's not really a great sign. Okay. Now it was clear they were trying to shut down DK Metcalf and were willing to give the underneath stuff to Jackson Smith and Jigva. That's how they decided to play things. That could evolve. But right now, Evan Williams is quite the risk playing that deep going into the semifinals of your playoffs. Now, the Seahawks offensive line, they were trying to pep them up early in the game, but the more the game went on, and particularly after the center was injured and they put in a backup there, it was just a disaster. They gave up 7 sacks. Geno had 3 in the time he played, but once Sam Howell came in, who, as you may recall, took a bunch of sacks in Washington last year, some of which attributable to line, much of which was attributable to him. Part of the reason Washington was not going to bet on him again this year, and of course they took Jay Daniels. But Howell gave up 4 sacks in his short time. Geno 3, total 7. So don't get carried away with some of the Packers stats. In particular, one of our fools goes this week, Kingsley Enagbare. He had 5 tackles, 5 of which was solo, 2 sacks, 3 tackle for loss, 2 quarterback hits. He got both those sacks against Sam Howell. So there you have it, fellas. Excuse me, not fellows, guys and gals. Sorry about that. And so we're not counting on him. He is our one of our fool's gold for this week. Let's move on to the Vikings to wrap up the NFC North here, everybody. They played 67 snaps, which is their lowest over the last 4 weeks. The previous 3 was 74, 82, and 76. So down a little bit snaps, and it was a blowout game against the Bears. Blake Cashman, again this week, only played 85% of the snaps. Okay, he led the team with 8 tackles, 7 solo. Kamu Grugier-Hill got 16%. Asamoah got 13%. Jamin Davis played 12%, though that was a little bit earlier. Bo Richter kind of played more on a little bit edge, on a little bit on the inside. He played about 15% of the snaps. The net of it is, with Ivan Pace on IR, you got Cashman at 1 linebacker, and then really it's Josh Metellus as the number 2 linebacker, even though he's listed as safety. He played only 84% of the snaps. Now, granted, there was a blowout and all, and he had 10 tackles and 8 solo. That is what he came up with. He actually led the team in tackles, not Cashman. Sorry about that. But he only played 4% of his snaps deep. So that's how you could play Metellus even at 84%, particularly if he's safety categorized and he's playing that close to line. Just keep an eye. I can't remember exactly when Ivan Pace is eligible to come back from IR. If he's eligible when we get into week 17, be very careful about that. Cam Bynum, 93% of the snaps he played. He played 65% of those deep, which led to his only having 4 tackles and 3 solo. Harrison Smith, 81% of the snaps he played, 45% of those deep, 3 tackles, all 3 were solos and 2 pass defense. But once again, below a type of game, some of these guys came on the field. For example, Theo Jackson played the other 19% of the snaps that Harrison Smith didn't play. Harrison Smith played 81. So hard to read too much into these stats with a blowout game and them sitting later in the 4th quarter. Be careful about that. The one thing, though, we talked about Metellus. You got it. We'll move on. Let's go ahead and move to the NFC East, everybody. And before I do that, you see, if you're watching on YouTube, but if you're just listening, idpplus.com, promo code 20% off. The code is props. Come join the family. We'll talk a little bit more later about all the great stuff we have at IDP Plus. Okay, on the NFC East front, we're going to start with the Commanders, who played against my Saints. Commanders only had to play 55 snaps in defense. Jake Haener kind of sucked. Rattler did a little bit better, even though he only completed less than 50% of his passes. Now, the second week in a row that the Commanders only played 55 snaps on defense. Jeremy Chin was injured during the game. He only played 73% of the snaps. As a result of that, let me just mention, he still led the team with 7 tackles. He also got a sack in there and a couple of tackles for loss. He only played 18% of the snaps deep, which is the lowest he's had in like at least 7 weeks. I didn't go all the way back, but at least 7 weeks. The reason was probably because they were playing the Saints, who really don't have any wide receivers you have to really worry about. It's Kamara, it's the tight ends for the most part on the targets. So that's why they could take that risk. When he went out, Derek Forrest came in, which I was surprised. I thought it might have been Percy Butler, but it was Derek Forrest who came in, ended up playing 56% of the snaps, and he played 68% of those snaps in the slot or in the box. So he played about 32% deep, in other words. So if Chin is out, Forrest could be a very deep league flyer for you to consider. And I would probably, if Chin is out, I would probably prefer him over this risk on the Hicks and Owens platoon, and maybe if they decide to go back to Hicks, or maybe they don't, I don't know. So if Chin is out, Forrest is a deep flyer. Once again, deep leagues, folks. Bobby Wagner let us down in the quarterfinals of our playoffs with only 5 tackles, 3 of which were solo. He did play 100% of the snaps, and so did Frankie Louvu. I was like, where in the heck is Frankie Louvu? What the heck is going on? It was one of those games, folks. He luckily had 2 quarterback hits and a pass defense. Didn't have a single tackle, not a solo, not an assist, not a I'm going to touch you when you're on the ground, nothing. So very disappointing, and unfortunately, it happened in the quarterfinals. Did I mention I lost on the Kings Classic and he was on my team as well? Okay, I digress. All right, last week, getting to the cornerbacks, when Marshawn Lattimore said, okay, he's expected to be active. My crystal ball prediction last week, based on how bad St. Juice was playing, that St. Still would probably stay on the outside, Igbonomine would stay on the inside, and St. Juice would go to the bench. Well, unfortunately, that prediction was correct. So A+ for being correct. Unfortunately for IDP, it is unfortunate that it was correct, because I think St. Still could be such a beast in the slot. Even on the outside, he's been real productive. So he played 94% of his snaps out wide. And even with that, 5 tackles, 2 solo, 2 pass defenses, one of which was an interception. So great for Sainris still, but boy, I'd love to have seen him on the inside. But that's not the way it's shaking out as of now. So unless there's an injury to Igbonomine, then I could see them moving Sainris still inside and putting St. Just on the outside. We're stuck with Sainris still on the outside, at least for this year. For you dynasty owners, hopefully they draft another outside cornerback next year where they can move him to the inside to have him even more productive. Deron Payne, last thing I mentioned for you defensive tackle required leagues. He's had 2.5 sacks now over the last 3 weeks, and he's got a decent schedule. Both Philadelphia and Atlanta, who they play next, are good for giving up points to defensive tackles. So Deron Payne, someone to watch for. Okay. Go into the Cowboys. Cowboys all played the Panthers, and they only played 55 snaps on defense. Hard to believe the Panthers were favored after watching that game. Look, the Cowboys are a little bit of a different team than what we saw during their worst case scenario situation. They got Micah Parsons back, who makes a big difference. They have Deron Bland back, who makes a big difference. Now Diggs went back on IR, as did DeMarvion Overshown, both of which hurts their defense. But overall, they're playing much better. And on top of that, the offense is doing better with Cooper Rush. So keep that in mind, that they're not the pushover if you're thinking about matchups for players on your offensive side of the ball. Now, because they only played 55 snaps, three people tied for the tackle lead with only 5 combined tackles of some sort. Maris Lufau ended up being the Overshown replacement. He played 87% of the snaps, 5 tackle, 2 solo, 1 tackle for loss, and a forced fumble. So he has been making big plays. Of course, he had the sacks the week before. They were cheap later in the game when he came in, and that's all he did, but he was productive with those. So he is making some big plays at least. Um, and if you need to play a linebacker, he's probably like a low end number 3 linebacker, roughly, let's call it, maybe mid number 3. Um, Kendricks played 100% of the snaps. Damone Clark played a big fat 0% of the snaps. So this is clearly a Kendricks and Lou foul. Unlike earlier in the year when I cautioned last week that Clark had picked up the snaps and Overshown and was out, Lou Fowles clearly leapfrogged him. If you're in a dynasty league and you need to pick up someone, you can drop Damone Clark. It certainly would appear. Donovan Wilson played 91% of the snaps, only had 5 tackles once again. Now, Micah Parsons, 2 sacks. He has had now, I believe that's 4 multiple sack games this year. We are playing Micah Parsons, folks. No questions asked. Last week we talked about Jordan Lewis playing in the slot. So I just want to reemphasize that point. He played 87% of the snaps. 100% of those were either in the slot or in the box or on the D line. So close to that line of scrimmage. 3 tackles, 2 solo, but he came out with that big sack. He also had a pass defense. So if he's playing like that in the slot, he can get you some points if for cornerback required positions. Make sure it's a team the Cowboys are playing that plays a lot of 11 personnel when you're considering playing him. Let's move on to the Giants versus the Ravens. The Giants played 59 snaps on defense. Of course, Tyler Nubin had the ankle injury and went on IR, which was a surprise. We didn't get an indication, any kind of indication coming out of the game that the injury was that severe. So if you came to our start sit show on Sunday morning, we did talk about the fact that we trusted Dane Belton playing that role, particularly since he had played so few snaps deep and played most of the snaps when he came in for Nubin near the box or in the box or in the slot. So Belton showed out with playing 100% of the snaps, 15 tackles, 7 solo. He got a sack, a tackle for loss, quarterback hit. He got a pass defense. He only played 37% deep. I am willing to take a chance, pick him up, and play him, once again, depending on my other safeties on my roster, and play him in the semifinals. Okay? That's a recommendation I feel pretty good about, folks. Hopefully I don't steer you wrong. Micah McFadden played 100% of the snaps, as did Darius Muasau. McFadden very efficient when he plays that many snaps, which he was once again this week. Kind of has you still wondering why Okereke couldn't be as productive. I'm bumping Okereke down my list for next year, by the way, from a draft perspective, as long as the same Giants coaching staff is there next year. But that'll be for Dynasty for later on. Muasau, then 100% of the snaps, had 6 combined tackles, only one of which was solo, 5 assisted. Not much to write home about. Granted, it was only 59% of the snaps. I'm not trusting him quite as much from a recommendation perspective, even though he played 100%. Isaiah Simmons did play 53% of the snaps. Great shot of him with his back turn, giving up a touchdown pass. He didn't have any stats, folks. We're not playing Isaiah Simmons. Jason Pinnock, in case you're wondering, the other safety, we talked about it last week. He played 81% of the snaps deep last week, which was a high for him. This week he was down to the 49% range. Of course, Belton was up slightly up to the 37% range. That's what I expect going forward. Still hard to trust Pinnock when he's playing that much deep, 50% or so. And I think it could be a little bit higher. So that's the scoop on Pinnock. Now, just one other offensive tidbit. Lamar Jackson threw for 5 TDs against the Giants. Now, the Giants were without 3 of their 4 top cornerbacks. That's not saying a whole lot to begin with. So they were really deep, in terms of having replaced Banks and Flott, and I can't even think of the other one off the top of my head. Adoree Jackson was the only one that did play. So the Falcons and Colts are coming up. And it got announced on Tuesday evening that Michael Penix was going to start for the Falcons. And of course, Anthony Richardson hasn't been able to hit the side of the barn most weeks. But it might make me tempted to want to play more either Falcons or Colts wide receivers if these cornerbacks continue to stay out for the Giants. Not to mention Dexter Lawrence being on IR, et cetera. Okay, Eagles versus Steelers. Not a ton to talk about here. They only played 43 snaps. If you want to have some fun, go research and do a quick Google search on how many snaps the Steelers played on offense in the fourth quarter. You'll be, huh? And the time of possession for the Eagles in the fourth quarter, huh? The Eagles thoroughly dominated the time of possession in the fourth quarter, um, on offense, that is. So Nakobe Dean played 93% of the snaps. And considering they only played 43 snaps, 10 tackles, 7 solo, pretty good. But that impacted Zach Vaughn, who only had 5 total tackles, all of which were solo. Um, Nolan Smith came through with a sack, a couple of tackles for loss, a couple of quarterback hits, and a pass defense. Very productive on his snaps. Now, and he played a significant amount of snaps. I think it was 95%. I didn't type it into my show notes, but I'm pretty sure it was 95%. I hope I'm remembering that correctly for you all. Cooper DeJean, the only other thing I want to point out, when teams are playing against teams that don't play a lot of 11 personnel. So when defenses are playing teams that don't play a lot of 11 personnel on offense, that slot cornerback is playing a lot less. Cooper DeJean only plays 67%. Of course, the Steelers do not play a lot of 11%. They're a heavy tight end oriented offense, the old Arthur Smith. So you still have the Mako Pruitts of the world, the Pat Fryermuths, the Hayward, Cam's little brother Connor, um, and Darnell Washington. So they're playing a lot of those tight ends. So you should have expected Cooper DeJean not to have a good game. Always keep that in mind. All right, we're going to switch to the NFC South, everybody, and we're going to talk about the Bucks, who they forced Justin Herbert into a really bad game. I'm like, is this the Tampa Bay Bucks? What the heck is going on? Chargers just laid a big fat egg. Of course, Herbert appeared to re-hurt himself in that ankle. That could have contributed. They have no running game without Dobbins. That certainly contributed, as it impacted how the Bucks attacked the Chargers. And also keep that in mind. But let's talk about what happened in this blowout game of only 52 snaps. Levante David did play 98% of the snaps, and he led the team with tackles, and he had a beautiful big line, including 1.5 sacks and 3 quarterback hits. Great game. At the number 2 linebacker position, KJ Britt was inactive. JJ Russell was active, which meant Vi Jones went back to the bench. Vi Jones played 1 snap on defense, 2%, which is 2% of snaps roughly. JJ Russell on 60% had 4 tackles, 3 solo. He is a real deep, desperate play. We're not playing J.J. Russell, folks. Okay, secondary. Jard Whitehead was put on our IR. Antoine Winfield got hurt last week, didn't play. Mike Edwards once again inactive. So last week, I was very clear. I said, stay away from these Bucks safeties and slots. And I hope you listen to my advice. Kavion Merriweather did play 100% of the snaps. He had 1 solo tackle. He played 77% of the snaps deep. Christian Izien played 83% of the snaps. He played 40% deep. He only had 1 solo tackle. Ryan Neal signed off the street, played with the Bucks last year. Disappointed in how things went for him, but he's been on the street all year, not even on a practice squad, folks. He played 17%. Once again, this was a blowout, so came in later in the game. He did have 3 tackles, 2 of which were solo. He played 23% deep. But 17%, by the way, was 9 snaps total, folks. Not a lot. Tyke Smith played 83% of the snaps, 100% in the slot boxer D line, but he had 1 total tackle. Okay. Chargers do play a lot of 2 tight ends, even with some of the injuries. I didn't get a chance to check this particular week, but we told you to stay away. We hope you stayed away. And based on these numbers and these stats, I'm not trusting any of these guys again in the semifinals of our fantasy football playoffs, folks. Stay away from those Tampa Bay safeties. With the caveat, of course, if Antoine Winfield does come back. We're playing Antoine Winfield. Kalijah Cansey, last thing in the Bucks, 2 more quarterback hits this week. He had 3 quarterback hits last week. Neither one of those 5 translated to any sacks per se. Now, previous to that, he had 5 sacks in the last 5 games. So he's coming close, but not quite hitting the lotto. Did I mention he was on my Kings Classic team too that let me down? Okay, we'll move on again. Falcons versus the Raiders. Falcons played 67 snaps. Now, That's been a high over the past 3 weeks. They played 60 the week before, 46 the week before. With Penix coming in, does that transform the offense a little bit more? Does that mean the Falcons play roughly a normal average amount versus the lower amount that they had the previous 2 weeks because their offense has been so sucky? Remember, they're playing the Raiders, who don't exactly have a world beater of an offense, particularly with Desmond Ridder at quarterback. So let's talk about who we will and won't trust. We will trust Caden Ellis, who played 100% of the snaps. Once again, did a beautiful job on the stat line with 11 tackles, 6 of which were solo. He got a sack. He got a couple quarterback hits. You could see him blitzing up the middle quite a bit with Caden Ellis. Now, this was probably a little bit more on the matchup side with Desmond Ridder at quarterback, the former Falcon, by the way, so they knew how to attack him. And to say Ridder looked jittery in the pocket would be an understatement when he was under pressure. So we're playing at Ellis. Troy Anderson got put on IR. So what we expected and would have hoped is that Nate Landman would have been the number 2 linebacker playing 85, 90% of the snaps. Oh, no, on the contraire, that did not happen. Landman, now he did leave for a period of time with an injury. He only played 30% of the snaps and finished with 3 tackles, 1 solo. JD Bertrand played 43% of the snaps, 4 tackles, 3 solo. You might be thinking, well, Ricky Rodriguez, is this because of the injury? And no, what happened is Landman and Bertrand appeared to be rotating, and I didn't get to 100% confirming, but just from watching the game, folks, not the stats, watching the game, they were rotating on early downs, and then on passing downs, Landman was out, Bertrand was in. What does that mean? We're not trusting either one of these guys. In fact, if I need to pick up somebody, I'm comfortable dropping Landman as a side note. Rashaan Evans was declared inactive before the game. Expect him to be active next week, but not necessarily to play, as a side note. A couple of fool's golds from this week from the Falcons. One was Zach Harrison, played 24% of the snaps, got the sack, got the safety, 2 tackles for loss, 4 tackles total, 2 of which are solo. But we're not banking on Zach Harrison for our fantasy playoffs. D'Angelo Malone, 2 sacks and 3 quarterback hits. Did I mention this was the Raiders and Desmond Ridder at quarterback? He only played 21% of the snaps. Don't go chasing D'Angelo Malone, folks. Arnold Ebiketie, I warn you all that it was fool's gold 2 weeks ago. Okay, he ended up picking up another sack last week, but he did that on only 33% of the snaps. This week, he was all the way up to 54% of the snaps, only had 1 assisted tackle. We're not banking on Arnold Ebiketie. Let's be really clear on that. Also, Jesse Bates, we called out last week his outlier in tackles, where he had 9 tackles and 4 solo, but he had played 71% of the snaps deep. He only had 2 tackles, both of which were solo this week. He did get the late game INT, which was great. Might have bailed you out if you played him, but we're not playing anyone that plays that deep, folks. We're not playing Bates. Okay, let's move on to the Panthers. Against the Cowboys, they ended up playing 73 snaps, which was more of a return to normal. That last week was the first time that they had played in the 50s. The previous low was 64. Returning to 73 felt like normal. Josie Jewell played 96% of those snaps, had 10 tackles, 5 solo, threw in a pass defense for you. Okay, Trevin Wallace was inactive due to injury. Claudin Charles played in his spot. A lot of people picked up Charles, and I saw that some people actually put him into his lineup, into their lineups. Great news in that he had 9 tackles, 5 which were solo, and 73% of the snaps. But he got hurt as well. On Tuesday, both Wallace and Charles both got put on IR. So who's next on the depth chart? Let's be clear, nobody what we're playing. But as of now, this particular moment, it's either cast off from Seattle, more special teamer John Radigan, or Jacoby Weinman, who's bounced between, I believe it's the Steelers practice squad and the Panthers practice squad this year, if I remember correctly. He's been back and forth a couple of times on that. Weinman got added to the 53 on Tuesday. We're not playing any of those guys. Who knows? They might sign Chandler Wooten off the street, who they started for a game and then released him and then got him on the practice squad, then let him go from there. So anyway, no number 2 linebackers for the Panthers, folks. Stay away. At the safety position, Jordan Fuller and Xavier Woods played 100% of the snaps. Nick Scott, who I've been warning you all about, Did get activated from the IR, was added to the 53, but was made inactive for the game. That's a good sign for Fuller and Woods at this point in time. Fuller is still a gamble, though. I just want to caution you on that. Nick Scott could take his place. So if you're playing Fuller, it's a risk. That's all I'm warning you. A couple of folks that let us down this past week. Jadeveon Clowney did return from injury. He had been productive many of the last several weeks here, but he only played 38% of the snaps coming back from injury. He did it in that he had 3 solo tackles and a couple of pass defense, which is great, but he had been playing in the near 70% range, clearly impacted his ability to create additional stats for us in our quarterfinals. DJ Wanham, who according to PFF, he's one of the most hated people there because he gets stats even though he's inefficient from a pass rush perspective, from pass rush win rate perspective, you name it kind of thing. But he ended up with 3 tackles, 2 solo, 1 pass defense. So he plays 82% of the snaps. Gives him a chance to give you some counting stats. He does luck into some sacks because he does play hard, but he's not necessarily a stud. Ashawn Robinson, also a big disappointment this week after putting up numerous great weeks of stats, which I have been very complimentary about in telling you all to play him and all. He played 63% of the snaps, but only had 2 assisted tackles. Let down. I'm still willing to play him in defensive tackle required leagues as we head to the semifinals. Let's go to the Saints real quick. They played a whopping 78 snaps on defense due to that poor quarterback play. Demario Davis, 2 weeks in a row with double-digit tackles with 14 combined tackles. Last week he had an interception. This week he came up with a sack. So great stats for him. Pete Werner played 85% of the snaps this week, 7 tackles, of which 2 were solo. The thing with Pete Werner is over the last 5 weeks, twice he's played in the 80% snap count range, 3 times he's played in the 60% snap count range. I am not trusting that in the fantasy playoffs. Look somewhere else instead of Pete Werner. Don't gamble. Willie Gay played 19% after the week before, not playing any defensive snaps, if I remember correctly. Ugo Amadi led the team, had a really good game with 7 tackles, 5 solo, a sack, a tackle for loss, quarterback hit, a pass defense. So really good stats out of that slot. The Commanders don't play a ton of 11 personnel, though. That impacted how he played. In fact, Jordan Howden came in for the other 21% of the snaps that Amadi didn't play and played more of a safety type of role when they had that 11 personnel. But luckily, Amadi still came through with the snaps. I continue to stress week after week, I've done it a couple of times already, make sure those slot cornerbacks are playing teams with a lot of 11 personnel if you're going to bank on them in these cornerback required leagues. Alontae Taylor, who we've been talking about, has been pushed to the outside due to all the injuries in the trade of Lattimore. He did play 100% of the snaps, 87% out wide. Even on 78 snaps, he only had 5 tackles, 3 of which are solo. Hard to trust him in the playoffs. You cannot look at the season to date. It is just too risky right now. Things change, folks, and that has certainly changed for him. Cam Jordan, 6 tackles, 3 solo, 2 sacks. Chase Young in the revenge game against Washington, 3 tackles, 2 solo, and two sacks. So they had 8 total sacks against the Commanders this week, did the Saints. Don't expect a repeat of that necessarily. Not sure I'm trusting the Saints and these edge players in particular, particularly when Cam Jordan only played 50% of the snaps, and I believe Chase Young played 54%, if I remember correctly. Once again, a couple of stats I didn't put into my show notes here. But so I'm not necessarily chasing that from this past week, team. Okay, we're going to move to the NFC West. And before we move to the NFC West, just want to remind you once again, Sunday morning, 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Central for 1 hour, the IDP Plus Start Sit show. I will be a part of that. Sean T at Sean 8386 he has been given some fantastic advice along with me, and I believe Michael Sicoli at Michael__Sicoli will hopefully be back to join us as well. The three of us have been given pat on the back, some pretty darn good advice in these start sit shows. If you have some questions, we want to help you win, but get in early. If you do get in late, you can use the super chat function, and we will guarantee to answer your question if you use the super chat function. All right, NFC West and the Arizona Cardinals. They only played 51 snaps on defense versus the Patriots. Kaiser White played 100%, led the team in tackles with 12. Mac Wilson was injured and only played 8% of the snaps. Chris Barnes is the person that came in for him, but only played 45% of the snaps, folks. So not something you can rely on. We weren't relying on Mac Wilson. Remember, we referred to him as fool's gold. We're certainly not trusting Chris Barnes either. Buda Baker played the 100% of the snaps. He had 10 tackles, 7 which was solo, tackling machine. And on Tuesday, they rewarded him with a 3-year extension. So for those of you like myself who was hoping that Dadrian Taylor Demerson could be a really good stash with Baker being a free agent, and then you have Baker, he goes somewhere else and is productive, and you have Taylor Demerson picking up that role with the Cardinals, well, you can kiss that goodbye. You can let him go in your dynasty leagues. Baker, Thompson, both signed, either one of free agents. We move forward with those two. Darius Robinson, the rookie, had his first career sack, 3 tackles, 1 solo. Not someone we're banking on for the playoffs, but as we look forward in Dynasty, we're keeping an eye on him. Baron Browning got a sack along with 2 total tackles. Fantastic for Baron Browning. Not trusting him. Someone, if he stays with Cardinals next year, could be a number 4 type of defensive end / edge player next year. That pretty much sums up the Cardinals, folks. We're going to go to the 49ers, who played 65 snaps on defense against the Rams. They wanted some people to play part of those snaps, but some people decided they didn't feel like playing. Well, maybe one person, I digress. Fred Warner finally had a game, and now a bunch of y'all may have, with the playoffs starting, said, I am not trusting Fred Warner. He hasn't done crud for my team. Okay, that's a better word. And then he comes through with 15 tackles, 8 solo, and a pass defense. Now, what was interesting is it felt like early in the game, and I didn't go back and count them, that when Dre Greenlaw was in the field, Greenlaw was clearly leading the team in tackles. Of course, he was activated from IR. He started the game, and he looked like a man that had some serious pin-up frustrations as he was on the field. He had 8 tackles and 3 solo before he had to tap out because his Achilles was feeling a little bit sore. He also had some knee soreness. So he only played 46% of the snaps and had those numbers. And it was after he went out that it really felt like Fred Warner really jacked up his snap count. I mean, not his snap count, but his stats. His stats. Of course, Devondre Campbell decided he didn't want to play. He was essentially being okay. I'm gonna be nice. Let's just put it this way. He was starting all year, but how can he not expect that Dre Greenlaw was going to start ahead of him, who they signed Campbell to fill his spot only until he was going to be until Greenlaw was going to be ready to go again. D. Winters was actually stealing some snaps from Devondre Campbell as well. You would think it wouldn't have been a surprise to him. It's not like the coaches probably told him right before the game that, hey, Devondre, we're going to start Greenlaw instead of you. You know, I'm guessing that didn't happen. So for him to do that and walk out on a team, I doubt if he ever plays on a team. If I have in a dynasty league and I'm desperate and I need a spot on my roster, I'm cutting him. I'm not worried about, well, what if somebody else picks him up? He's 30 years old, etc. I wouldn't worry about it, folks. Even though Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles played 40% of the snaps, he's not the number 3. D. Winters is 3. So Warner, Greenlaw, Winters, DFF, Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles is number 4. Malik Mustafa was out. Jair Brown moved back in the starting lineup as a result, but he got injured as well. He did play 92% of the snaps. He played 45% deep. Hufanga, back from injury, back to 95% of the snaps. They did want to have him on a snap count to a certain degree, but with the injuries to Mustafa and then Brown, he had to play more than they wanted, was what I read. He played 58% deep. That's not great for Hufanga, by the way, folks. 58%. Brown played only 45% deep. Part of this was how they were also attacking the Rams defense, and clearly they were doing some things to take Cup out of the mix as well, as a side note. So for those of y'all that had Cup and maybe still somehow advanced, congratulations on that. Nick Bosa returned from injury. Bosa played only 72% of the snaps. He did get 3 quarterback hits, 4 tackles, 2 solo, though he didn't get any sacks. And he usually plays in that 80+% range. I expect that to happen as we move forward. They had 6 sacks against the Bears the previous week to the 49ers, none this week against the Rams. That tells you all you need to know about the Bears offensive line. The Rams versus the 49ers, they played 54 snaps, which was a really low snap count for them. Christian Roseboom played 87% of those. Once again, hyper efficient with those, leading the team with 9 tackles, including a sack. Omar Spates played 67%. Kobe Turner now has 5 sacks for the season, with him getting 2 in this game on 70% of the snaps. Hopefully he can continue to do that in the playoffs, but it's a bit risky with him. Quentin Lake played 100% of the snaps. He only played 30% deep, folks. But that low snap count, only 3 tackles. Look, Quentin Lake is not a stud of a player. It's his alignment which tends to help him. But if you have better options, I'm okay benching Quentin Lake as we move into the semifinals, just so you all know that. Cam Curl, 100% of the snaps, only 2 pass defenses, 69% of the snaps were deep. Cam Kinch has only played 52% of the snaps, of which 86% were deep. I'm not really. Roseboom is about the only linebacker or defensive back I feel decent about playing for the Rams right now. Not feeling great about Lake as well. So there you have it on the Rams. Let's go to the Seahawks, who played 64 snaps this past week against the Packers. Ernest Jones played 95% of the snaps. The bigger news is Tyrese Knight was all the way up to 98% of the snaps. Highest he's played so far this year. He's usually, let's just call it roughly in that 80% range. But even playing that many snap percentages, 98%, he only had 6 tackles, 3 solo. So after leading the team in tackles the week before, he returned to what I'd call normal from a production perspective. There are no sacks from any of the edge players. The big call out is Nuso was up to 48% from 38% in his first game back. Mafe was down to 34%. Derek Hall played 56%. Draymond Jones was down to 39%. Derek Hall did get 3 quarterback hits. Out of all of these 4, at this point in time, if I had to play one, it'd be Derek Hall first, Boy Mafe second, if I had to play him. Kobe Bryant played 100% of the snaps. He played 81% deep. You're lucky he got an interception, and he got the 8 tackles, 7 which were solo. That's going to be on the higher side for someone that plays that deep. It's risky to play Kobe Bryant. Been lucky so far, but I'm telling y'all, it's a risk. That wraps up the NFC, everybody, and we're going to go to the AFC. And we're about 45 minutes in, so I will try and pick up the pace a little bit on some of this. But I'll try and make sure I give you the key information. Starting the AFC East with the Buffalo Bills, they played 80 snaps. Terrell Bernard played 100%. Now, 80 snaps is a freaking lot, but when you have a game that goes into the 40s for both teams, that's going to potentially happen. 10 tackles, 4 solo for the second week in a row, those identical stats, although he did get also a tackle for loss this week. Matt Milano cannot stay healthy, left the game with an injury. He was playing about 100% of the snaps though this week, but he only made it through 58% of the snaps in total. He only had 3 assisted tackles and a quarterback hit in that time. Not very productive. Dorian Williams played 25% of the snaps. He got injured earlier in the game, had an elbow issue, but did come back later in the game to finish it out. So Balin Spector, between Milano going out and Williams coming in, Balin Spector picked up 23% of the snaps. What does that mean? It means if Milano's out, Bernard's still number 1 as that green dot Mike linebacker playing 100% of the snaps. Dorian Williams is your number 2, not Balin Spector. Okay? Teron Johnson played 89% of the snaps. Great game, as he typically does from the cornerback position, that slot cornerback position. At the safety spot, Taylor Rapp, DeMar Hamlin, both were out. Cameron Lewis, who substituted and played earlier in the year when there were some injuries, had 6 tackles and 4 solo on 100% of the snaps. In deep leagues, if Rapp and Hamlin are not playing, Cam Lewis is someone you can consider. Cole Bishop played 59% of snaps. Now, I didn't see reports of injuries in write-ups after the game. I didn't get to search all the Bills websites that I wanted to, but I did hear as I was tuning into the broadcast that it sounded like they said Cole Bishop was carted off. So don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure that's what I heard. So Kareem Jackson played the other 41%. 59 plus 41 equals 100. So it feels like that is what happened, that Bishop did get injured. Watch the injury reports on Bishop. If Hamlin and Rapp are out, it's Lewis and Kareem Jackson that would appear to be your 2 safeties for the Buffalo Bills. Okay. Ed Oliver had his best game of the year by far, it felt like, even though his stats were 4 tackles, 3 solo, a sack, and then a tackle for loss and 3 quarterback hits. It just felt like he was all over the place. Felt like he was a monster against the Lions, against that tough defensive line. So if Ed Oliver, if you're desperate in an interior defensive tackle required lineup / roster, I'm okay playing Ed Oliver going into the semifinals. The Bills want to try and catch up with Kansas City, get to that number 1 seed. I'm going to take a chance that he's going for it to help out. The Dolphins versus the Texans. The Dolphins played only 50 snaps. At linebacker position, Jordan Brooks played 100% of the snaps. Anthony Walker played 100% of the snaps. Tyrell Dodson played 0, not Zippo, I should say. Zilch. Tyrell Dodson, no snaps on defense. This is the Brooks and Walker show currently until Walker gets hurt again. But in the meantime, those are the 2 to play at linebacker. No other non-cornerback had more than 4 combined tackles for the Dolphins. Zach Sealer, another terrific game with 1.5 sacks, including 2 quarterback hits. Chop Robinson, 56% of the snaps, 1.5 sacks, 4 quarterback hits. So for those that have been tuning in and listening for quite a while, several weeks back, you heard me say, boy, he's generating the pressures, but he's not turning it into productivity. If he turns into productivity, he could be quite the steal as we get into the rest of the season. I made a joke. He was playing like Tarzan, but his stats were like Jane because he wasn't getting it. He is now producing. Someone I'm willing to take a chance on in deeper leagues as an edge player here as we go into the semifinals. The Jets win a freaking game. Of course, it was against the Jaguars. They played 85 snaps on defense. Holy crap. In the second half in particular, the Jags just dinked and dunked and dinked and dunked and dinked and dunked while the Jets were scoring like at will against the Jags. That's what happened. Jamian Sherwood, he left the game for a period of time but did come back. He only played 87% of the snaps as a result. Led the team with 9 tackles. Quincy Williams for the second week in a row. Not sure what's going on there, folks. I do not have a good answer for you. He did play 96% of the snaps, similar to last week, but only 4 tackles, 3 solo, 1 pass defense. So he laid another egg, in my opinion, for 2 weeks in a row. Did I mention he was on my Kings Classic team too? I digress once again. Chaz Surratt, if you're wondering, is the number 3 linebacker now with C.J. Mosley on IR. So if something were to happen with Sherwood being hurt, and you need a linebacker, Chaz Surratt. If it turns out that Sherwood was able to come back in but can't play this coming week, Chaz Surratt would be the linebacker to watch. Quinnen Williams left with a hamstring injury. If you're in a defensive tackle required league, not that Quinnen Williams has the great year we're all hoping for and expecting, watch out for that. You may not be able to play him. Will McDonald, 73% of the snaps, only 2 assisted tackles. Last week he played in the 80% range, and basically I had a goose egg if I'm remembering correctly because I think I made fun of that. Hassan Reddick, 71% of the snaps, 1 solo tackle. That's all he had. He's going, he is not going to make up those fines. We've talked about this week over week. Not betting on Hassan Reddick. In the secondary, Brandon Echols and DJ Reed were ruled out. Michael Carter got hurt. Jalen Mills left the game hurt. The safeties, we talked about the last 2 weeks. We're not trusting Jet safeties. Chuck Clark, because Jalen Mills got injured, my opinion, because Jalen Mills got injured, finally played 100% of the snaps. He got 7 tackles, 6 solo, but he also played 64% of those snaps deep. If you want to gamble with Chuck Clark in the playoffs, in the semifinals, go for it. I'm saying don't do it, folks. Adams played 69%. Mills played 18% before he was injured. Aston Davis played 17%. Isaiah Oliver, as a side note, played 57% of the snaps, but 96% of that was in the slot or box or D line. He didn't play any deep safety snaps as he had a little bit earlier this year. Let's go to the Patriots now, real quick. Patriots played a whopping 71 snaps on defense. And I'm going to apologize to you all in a minute. So first, Kyle Duggar played 100% of the snaps, and he led the team with 10 tackles, okay, including 1 tackle for loss. He only played 37% deep, which is a little bit more than he had been playing previous weeks, 27, 33, and 33. Jabril Peppers played 99%. Here comes the apology. I should have known not to trust the Patriots coaches, first Belichick and now Mayo, his disciple, about, trying to be cute and playing people in different positions too much and blah, blah, blah. Well, Peppers, who had played 25, 16, and 26% of his snaps deep in the previous 3 weeks of playing that he had played 48% deep in this game against the Cardinals. Now, what do we know about Kyler Murray? He's been having a real hard time throwing the ball deep. Absolutely has really struggled deep. That's been a consistent theme for him over the past several years. Part of the reason Marvin Harrison is struggling. But yet, here we go. They play Jabril Peppers 48% deep. Now, luckily, he got 7 tackles, including 1 tackle for loss. But don't trust Jabril Peppers. That's my apology. I should have warned you all last week. I should have thought through that. I apologize. We move on. Linebacker position, I have been warning you about it. Jelani Tavai, 79% of the snaps, only 7 tackles. Christian Ellis left the game with the injury after 53%. Sion Taki played 51%. They showed him a couple of different times being out of position. We're not playing Taki. We're not playing Ellis. We're playing Tavai if we're desperate. We're not really relying on these guys. Christian Barmore had no stats. I believe that might be the second week in a row. He did play 51% of these snaps. He missed so much time, got off to a great start those first couple of games. I'm guessing he's just not in that playing game shape. That's Ricky guessing, folks. So I'm not relying on him as we win the semifinals and finals. We're going to move to the AFC North, but before we do, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, we're going to talk briefly about what you can get at IDP Plus. We have some great articles on both fantasy and props. We have rankings of offensive players as well as individual defensive players. We have some great tools. We have the snap count tool. We have the injury report tracker. We have the team fantasy points allowed by position for both offensive players as well as individual defensive players. We have weekly fantasy finishes for both offensive players and IDP players by position or in total. We also have our YouTube channels, of course. You have the fantasy one here. We have our bets one as well. And if you haven't gone to our bets one, I say it every week. I was just talking with Johnny Christoffi, who does one of our shows, and we have a ton of great shows on both our fantasy channel and on our props channel. Johnny was talking about how if people listen to him, they made some darn good money. Okay, this past weekend. Okay, let's move on to the AFC North. Please join us at IDP Plus. Use the code PROPS and save 20%. All right, we are going to start as we do with the Bengals, who played 70 snaps on defense. Akeem Davis-Gaither, who we said, yes, you can trust, led the team in tackles with 12 tackles, 6 solo. He played 99%. Jermaine Pratt, another great game, 100% of the snaps. Only 8 tackles, though, but still a solid game overall, playing 100%. You're going to play both of these guys as we move forward. Sam Hubbard, been dogging him on the show, and now he's been playing injured, but of course he catches a touchdown pass. Great for Sam Hubbard. Okay, very happy for the dude, but then he tears his PCL or hurts his PCL. They haven't said technically it's torn yet, but expect him to be out rest of the year. He played 14% of the snaps on defense. Joseph Asai, 59%. Miles Murphy, who had played a career high 57% last week, back down to 43. Cedric Johnson even picked up 14% of the snaps. Of course, Hendrickson played his normal amount. So Asai, who had a sack for several weeks in a row, did not get one this week. He's been ranked around number 50 in PFF rankings, and shout out to PFF, by the way, as I do every week for some of these alignment stats that I use. So shout out to them. Uh, but Asai has not been a really good pass rush win rate player, so he is a bit of a gamble. But his snap percent should increase a little bit more these last couple of weeks, which makes him potentially playable depending on if you're desperate. At the safety position, Jordan Battle. We talked about it last week. The safety rotation has almost ended. He played 90% of the snaps. He got 10 tackles, 5 solo, a fumble recovery, and a fumble lost at the goal line because he was getting too excited to want to celebrate a touchdown when he picked up that fumble and was running towards the end zone. My gosh, him and Jonathan Taylor. Ugh. I digress. Well, at least neither one was on my Kings Classic League. They didn't cost me the victory. All right. So the one thing I will say is Jordan Battle played 52% closer to the line. He played 48% deep for the. Well, he had one or two of those at wide corner, but basically it was 48% deep. So 52% line is good. And they did play 70 snaps, which is more than average. So he's playable, but he's still only playing 90% of the snaps. But don't think he's a safety 1 or even a safety 2. He's more like a safety 3, to be honest with you all. Okay. Um, disappointed the Bengals only got 1 sack against the Titans, and that was B.J. Hill. It was not Trey Hendrickson. The Browns played 75 snaps on defense. Once again, another heavy snap count for a defensive team. Usually we're in that 65 range. Here we're at 75. So you would expect some pretty good stats, but we didn't necessarily see that. Jordan Hicks got 92%, led the team with only 9 tackles, though. Devin Bush only played 39%. Mohamed Dabate, who I butcher his name every week, 59% of the snaps, only 3 tackles, one of which was solo. So Nathaniel Watson even got a couple of snaps on defense. It was 3%. He got a few special team tackles as well. We're not playing any safeties. As a reminder, other than Grant Delpit, he played 99%, had 9 tackles. Ronnie Hickman of the other 3 played the most at 60% as a side note. No one on the Browns got a sack. Myles Garrett did go back in the game after getting poked in the eye. Got it checked again on Monday. Appears to be all clear for the coming week. You might expect the Browns to play a lot more snaps this coming week, as a side note, by the way, because DTR is going to be the starting quarterback instead of Winston. Moving on to the Ravens, they played 68 snaps, which is a little bit more than average, but this was a blowout game. So late in the game, a lot of the key starters, your Roquan Smith, your Kyle Hamiltons, moved to the bench. Blowout games, hard to draw conclusions, but one thing is clear. Trenton Simpson is now the number 4 linebacker. Chris Board and Malik Harrison were 2 rotating next to Roquan Smith. Malik played 79%. Chris Board played 43%. Roquan only played 76% of the snaps, which that's why you only see him for 5 tackles and 3 solo. But apologies to anybody that cost your teams in the playoffs. Cost you moving forward. Roquan Smith hasn't been quite the tackling machine he has been in the past. This certainly didn't help you, though, this past week in the quarterfinals. If you made it to the semis with that, congratulations. That was against the Giants. Expect things to return to normal. Kyle Hamilton played only 74% of the snaps as well. So thus he had only 6 tackles, 4 which were solo. Now this week he only played 38% of his snaps deep, which is the lowest he had played over the last 4 weeks. The previous ones with that were 45, 65, and 55. But it was the Giants. Tim Boyle was not someone that the Ravens were worried about killing them deep. So I could see why Hamilton did play a little bit more closer to the line and only didn't play quite as much deep as he had been. I expect that to go back to normal, and normal has been in that, let's just call it 45 to 65% range, somewhere in there. That's what I expect, which will impact his stats. Ar'Darius Washington did play 100% of the snaps deep. So anyway, that's the Ravens situation. Hamilton, for his name, is quite the risk. Just want to leave it at that, folks. Let's go to the Steelers versus the Eagles. Steelers played a monstrous 81 snaps on defense. This game did not go to overtime. Talked about earlier when we talked about the Eagles, how the Eagles just dominated the fourth quarter on offense. Patrick Queen played 100% of the snaps, 11 tackles, 6 solo, did get a quarterback hit. You would hope on 81 snaps, he would have done a little bit better than that, but would take the 11 tackles. Of course, the big news for the Steelers, TJ Watt hurt his ankle later in the game. He did have 2 sacks before he left, which was great. He did practice on Monday, didn't practice on Tuesday. Mike Tomlin said he's truly questionable to play this weekend, and it is a Saturday game, as I talked about earlier. Nick Herbig could be a viable replacement. If he's out there on the waiver wire, if he got dropped, you're a Watt owner, maybe somebody to go and grab, and I'd be willing to take the chance of putting him in 1-for-1 on this swap. Alex Highsmith was back for the second week, but only back up to 62% of the snaps, where he'd been in the 80s. Now, when he was in the 80s, Preston Smith also wasn't part of the team as well. But now with Watt potentially injured, I do expect Highsmith back into the that 80% range as we move forward. The biggest news of all, from a playing time perspective or alignment perspective with the Steelers, Deshaun Elliott being out. Well, TJ Watt's news is big too. Okay, so 2 big pieces in news. But Elliott was out. Minkah Fitzpatrick played 100% of the snaps. Now, I think it was 2 weeks ago I talked about why we hadn't been talking about Minkah Fitzpatrick on this show, and it was because he was always playing so deep, and I kind of read you off his deep snap counts. Well, this week, he only played 26% deep after playing 72, 64, 54, and 59% deep the previous weeks. If he's only going to play 26% deep with Deshaun Elliott out, he could be a league winner, and probably many deeper leagues, and even some shallower leagues, he's probably sitting out there on the waiver wire. If Elliott's out, he is someone to consider playing, particularly against teams that run a lot, which like Houston does with Joe Mixon, for example, or like Philadelphia does with Saquon Barkley and Gainwell, because Barkley got dinged up a little bit. And I think that comment with Elliott hurt and with a team that's potentially going to run a lot, they move Fitzpatrick up. That could be a real cheat code for a victory. I hope I don't steer you wrong. It is still a bit of a risk, but Minkah Fitzpatrick, pick him up, watch the injury reports, consider playing him, folks. Okay, DeMonte Casey played 80% of the snaps at the other safety position as a side note. Landon Roberts, which is another good sign for Fitzpatrick, by the way, if Casey only played 80%. Landon Roberts, because of the expected run heaviness of the Eagles, although they swapped things around and did do more passing because of all the noise with A.J. Brown and so forth. But Roberts played 61% of the snaps. Peyton Wilson only played 38% of the snaps, although Peyton Wilson had better productivity stats. Okay, we're going to move to the AFC South, everybody, and we are going to start with the Colts. And they, of course, played the Broncos. And let me shift the banner here to the AFC South for those that are watching. The defense played 63 snaps this week. Very shocking that the offense actually played 76 snaps versus the Broncos. We're going to talk about the Broncos a little bit later. With only 63 snaps, it did impact a lot of the stats outside of the usual E.J. Speed and Zaire Franklin. Nick Cross did play 100% of the snaps, if you're wondering, but 5 tackles, 3 solo, and he got an interception, which is also, of course, a pass defense. But everybody else was impacted by that lower snap count than they've typically played in terms of the individual stats. The other thing to mention, Tyquan Lewis was all the way up to 43% of the snaps played on the defensive end/edge position for the Colts. That's impacting Latu, Pay, and Odiengbo's overall individual stats as well. So that's a little bit risky for those. Not much else to talk about on the Colts. Let's go to the Jaguars. And I love talking about the Jaguars because I know it's a frustrating point for all of us. But they only played 58 snaps on defense, as I alluded to earlier when talking about the Jets. Previously, it was 65, 63, 80, and 84. So the Mac Jones-led offense is actually keeping the defense on the field a roughly average amount these last few weeks. That's the good news. Let's talk about the linebacker rotation for this week. Foyo Lucan did play 100% of the snaps. He played 79% in the box, 11% on the D line. But when we were talking about him previously, he was playing a little bit more on the edge. He didn't play quite as much on the edge. This was more the interior part of the D line. So that was some good news there. But of course, we know that his stats just weren't there with 4 tackle, 3 solo, and tackle for loss. And once again, only 58 snaps. But that was a real letdown. Folks, I know he's got the name. I don't, and in particular with the way Mac Jones is dinking and dunking in these long, slow drives and so forth, Aluakon, maybe there's other better options. Be open to considering it as you look through your rosters and you're setting your lineups, not to mention the waiver wire and some of the other names we've talked about. Devin Lloyd only played 76% of the snaps. Vintrell Miller played 26%. You add that up, you get to 102%. I didn't get a chance to research how much they played together, but it feels like there was a bit of rotation, folks, just in looking at things. Of course, Devin Lloyd played 82% of that 76% within the box, which is good. He did play 5% of the D line. He did play some steps in the slot as well when he was guarding a running back, like coming out of slot man to man, coming out of the backfield in a man-to-man kind of position. You can't play Vintrell Miller, okay, at 26%. Next, the safeties, we've been talking about it. The only thing I do want to mention to keep an eye on, while Darnell Savage was still that 98% mode, and we don't play Darnell Savage as a reminder, Antonio Johnson leaped back to 67%, Andre Cisco 45%. That's how I kind of started the year with Johnson playing more than Cisco, then it kind of flip-flopped. Now it's flip-flopped back again. We're not playing any of these safeties. Last thing I'll mention, Josh Hines Allen and Travon Walker have good matchups in week 16 and 17. If you're desperate, they might be worth the gamble based on the matchups they have in these next couple of weeks. Let's move to the Texans. Texans played 68 snaps. Of course, Azeez Al-Shaair is still suspended. Christian Harris, I've been warning you guys, talking about how when he comes back from week 14 bye, it was expected he was going to play, and he certainly did. So Toto played, Tuoto, however you say his name, Henry played 100% of the snaps and led the teams with tackles with 11 tackles, even got a half a sack as part of that, but no tackle for loss, no quarterback hits. You know what that means? He chased the guy, and the guy went down right in front of him, and he got credit for it. Or maybe that was the one where the guy ran out of bounds. I forget which one it was, and it was close enough that they gave him half a sack. Whichever one it was, he got credit. Good for him. Christian Harris only played 82% of the snaps in his first game back. I do expect that to increase. Now, we got the questions on the start sit show on Sunday morning. We had a couple of them related to Neville Hewitt, and we said, do not trust Neville Hewitt. Don't go there. Don't do it. I hope you listen to it, and I hope you were listening to our show. He ended up playing only 3% of the snaps. And so don't trust Neville Hewitt. Jalen Petrie, he's on IR. Jimmy Ward played 97% of the snaps. Eric Murray played 100% of the snaps and had a whopping 3 tackles, 2 which were solo. So anyway, we're not trusting Eric Murray. We're not trusting Jimmy Ward except in the deepest of leagues. Daniil Hunter, 1.5 sacks. Will Anderson, 1 sack. The reason I wanted to call this out is Will Anderson played 69% of the snaps. Is not to call out the 69 in this particular case as a joke, but more so from the standpoint he was playing, in that 80% range. So since he's back from his injury these past couple of weeks, he's not playing the full amount of snaps he had been. Hopefully that increases, and hopefully his productivity and his stats increase with it. Just want to shout out Derek Stingley from LSU, 2 interceptions, great game playing defense against Tyreek Hill. Moving on to the Titans versus the Bengals. They did play a very nice 69 snaps, as a side note. James Williams led the team with 8 tackles and 6 solo on 62% of the snaps. And you're like, who, what, why? Okay, so let's talk about it. James Williams was a safety at Miami. He was deemed a little bit on the slow side to play safety. He was, I believe, it was a 5th-round pick of the Titans, maybe 5th or 6th round. I can't remember for sure. Okay, they moved him to linebacker. They started transition in the offseason from the safety he played in college. But why did he play? First, Jerome Baker and Otis Reese were declared inactive. Luke Gifford got injured during the game, if I remember right, it was a concussion after 42% of the snaps. Kenneth Murray played 94% of the snaps. He left the game for a period of time with his hamstring, but luckily he did go back in. And he did finish with 7 tackles. Luke Gifford in his 42% of snaps was heck of a productivity, had a heck of a productive game. Okay, take 2 on that. So if Gifford clears concussion protocol and plays, we're playing him. Who do I see 1 through 5 at the linebacker position? Kenneth Murray and Luke Gifford are your 1 and 2. Baker is number 3, Reese is 4, and Williams is 5. So even though Williams led the team in tackles, he's 5th in that pecking order in Ricky's opinion. Okay? So don't go on a limb going in semifinals and playing James Williams unless you get word that these other 3 or 4 guys ahead of him are out. Okay? Jeffrey Simmons had a really big game. Great for you people that not you people, for us that have defensive tackle required leagues. He's a stud. You play him every week. Imani Hooker played 100% of the snaps. He played 61% of those deep after a very nice 69% the week before. He's playing deep, folks. Hard to trust. Darrell Worley, a previous Fool's Gold, when he had those 18 tackles, he played 96% of the snaps. Second week in a row, he's roughly in that 5 tackle range. He did get an interception, but he played 73% deep, which was after 61% the week before. We're not trusting Darrell Worley. For the second week in a row, Harold Landry is the only person on the Titans to record a sack. So the Arden Key excitement that we had earlier has now dissipated, folks, at least for now. We're wrapping it up with the AFC West. And let's change the banner here for those that are watching. Okay, Broncos versus the Colts. The Broncos played a whopping 77 snaps after playing 86 the week before. I know Riley Moss getting injured was having an impact, but my goodness, can just Riley Moss have that kind of impact to the Broncos defense, or are people figuring it out? Now, Patrick Surtain did miss a couple of snaps, if I remember correctly. I forgot to note it down, folks, sorry. But on Tuesday, Surtain practiced in full for the coming week, and Riley Moss practiced in limited. Good sign for both of them to potentially play on Thursday night, but keep an eye on that. Brandon Jones returned from injury and led the team with tackles. He played 93% of the snaps, and he had 9 tackles, 6 of which were solo, 3 pass defense, and interception. Brandon Jones, the way they've been utilizing him this year, when he is healthy, he is an IDP safety. We want to play a top 12 type of safety. At the linebacker position, Justin Sternard, 93% of the snaps this week after 91 and 82 the previous couple of weeks. Before that was 47, 62, 25, 61. Couldn't trust him, but the snap count last 3 weeks, he's worth using as a linebacker 4 and worth trusting. And he had 9 tackles, 2 solo, and a tackle for loss. So in a deeper league, I'm taking the chance on playing him based on the snap counts from the last 3 weeks. Cody Barton plays typical 100%. Zach Allen, we warned you, it was a bad matchup this coming week. That was on the start-sit show. Only had 2 tackles, one of which was solo, but he did at least get 4 quarterback hits. That hopefully helps some of you out from a scoring system perspective. Lastly, on the Broncos, Nick Bonito, in the last 12 weeks, with the half a sack he got this week, last 12 weeks now has 11 and a half sacks. Only 1 game without a sack. He's got 2 touchdowns over the last 2 weeks after the trick play. It was called a lateral, not an interception. So a fumble recovery that he took all the way back when it was thrown backwards across the field. The dude's been a monster, and not just on the sack side. This week he had 5 tackles, 3 solo to go along with that half a sack and a touchdown and so forth. So fantastic. We're playing Nick Bonito, in case you were wondering. Let's move on to the Chargers. Played 72 snaps versus the Bucks. Remember, this was a blowout game, so even though they played 72 snaps, keep that in mind. Denzel Perryman was once again rolled out. He was a limited participant in practice on Tuesday going into the Thursday night game. Keep an eye on that because it could have an impact to the linebacker rotation. Let's jump to the linebacker rotation first. I'm actually going to change the order. Deion Henley played 96% of the snaps. That's my show order, by the way. 96% of the snaps for Deion Henley, continues to be the number one linebacker. Troy Dye, 56%. Junior Colson only played 53% of the snaps. Uh, excuse me, Junior Colson played 29% of the snaps, excuse me. So let's repeat that. Henley 96, Dye 56, Colson 29. Very disappointing. We're certainly not going to trust Colson on that. We're not going to trust Dye, even though he was efficient from a tackle perspective on that limited snaps, particularly with the chance that Perriman's coming back. You may remember early this year, for those of y'all that were paying attention and following along with us, a lot of rotation in that Chargers linebacker position. Outside of Henley, there's a risk of that continuing or happening this week. We're trusting Henley. We're not trusting any of the Charger linebackers. The reason I changed the order because I had Elijah Moden first originally because he led the team with 9. He was tied for the team lead with 9 tackles, along with Dye and along with Henley. Had his name first. He played 79% of the snaps. He left with a knee injury and did not practice on Tuesday. Chances are that's a signal that he will not play on Thursday. He played 63% of his snaps deep as a side note. That is a lot of deep snaps. Tony Jefferson played 53% of the snaps. Marcus May played 38% of the snaps. A potential rotation situation there with Moden out. We're not playing Moden. We're not playing Jefferson. We're not playing May. Derwin James, we are playing. He played 96% of the snaps, only 13% deep. So while his stats weren't that great with 6 tackles, 5 solo, and tackle for loss, considering 72 snaps in particular, that wasn't great. We're playing Derwin James. For the second week in a row, none of the big 4 edge players got a sack for the Chargers. Tuli T played Tui Peloto, to be precise, played 65% of the snaps, had no stats whatsoever. Khalil Mack, 50% of the snaps, 1 assisted tackle. Joey Bosa, 60% of the snaps, 2 solo tackles. Bud Dupree, 38% of the snaps, 1 assisted tackle. Folks, that's not good from any of those edge players, and that's on 72 snaps. Now, it was a bit of a blowout, so that's why you see Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa slightly lower snap counts than we had been expected from them and from a playing time perspective. But still, not good. Hard to trust any of these guys going into our semifinals from a playoffs perspective. Oh, the Chiefs, the bane of many of our existence this year. Guess who led the team in tackles if you didn't read the box score yet? By the way, they only played 62 snaps once again, which is just a killer, okay? Christian Roland Wallace. Who? Christian Roland Wallace led the team in tackles with 6 tackles, 3 solo, and a pass defense. That was on 27% of the snaps, so he did get a little bit of that on special teams, if I recall correctly. Of the limited snaps he played, he played once again. Let me try that again. He only played 27% of the snaps. 94% of those were in the slaughter box, but that was only 16 snaps in total of the 62 that the team played. We're not playing Christian Roland Wallace, folks. He's our Nazi Johnson. He's our Joshua Williams of previous times. We're not playing him, okay? I got some other news here that you want to pay attention to related to the slot position coming up. By the way, Christian Roland Wallace was an undrafted free agent out of USC cornerback. We're not playing him. I said that twice, 3 times. You get it. Chamari Connor got injured this week, unfortunately. He only played 35% of the snaps. Of that, he played 95% as he had been in the slot or the box or the D line. So he was playing that typical role, but he got hurt. Trent McDuffie, who played 100% of the snaps in total, he played 37% of his snaps in the slot box D line. That was the most he played in those positions since week 5 of this year. And while Christian Roland Wallace played some of that, they went to McDuffie to play that role. And that meant Joshua Williams came in and played more snaps on the outside. Nazi Johnson came back in and played more snaps on the outside. We're not playing those 2. But if Chamari Connor's out and Trent McDuffie goes into that slot, That could be sort of like we're talking about Minka Fitzpatrick in alignment and positioning. That could be a winner for you because if they use him there, then they'll probably use him to blitz off the edge as they typically do. Um, he'll get more tackles from that position. That could be a major win. Check who they're playing. If there's enough 11 personnel, keep that in mind, and then watch and see if Chamori Connor is out as well. So anyway, that's the scoop. Trent McDuffie, that could be a real good one for y'all, folks. As a side note, Brian Cook only played 63% of the snaps. I haven't seen anything about an injury, but he only played 63%. Watch the injury reports on him. Hopefully you weren't playing him anyway. Justin Reed did play 100% as he had been. Jaden Hicks played a career high 66%. However, Jaden Hicks played 71% deep. That's not what we're looking for, folks. So great, Jaden Hicks is getting on the field. He was a 4th-round pick. I know a lot of non-NFL GMs out there, meaning fantasy football folks, thought Jaden Hicks would get drafted higher. He did get picked to the 4th round, and he's playing 71% deep. Be really careful about potentially playing him. By the way, as a side note, 4 other players had 5 tackles in terms of, so after Roland Wallace's 6, 4 players tied with 5. That sucks. I'm sorry. That was Justin Reed, Bolton, Joshua Williams, and Drew Tranquil. Hard to play Chiefs other than Chris Jones, defensive tackle. You never know when he's going to go off with those 2 sacks and those 3 quarterback hits. So Chris Jones, you got to play in defensive tackle required leagues. George Karlaftis did have 2 sacks and 3 quarterback hits. Don't expect a repeat of that, folks, as we move forward. Last but not least, the Raiders. I cannot do it, Chris Berman. I'm sorry. I tried. Please don't bash me for that. They only played 58 snaps against that woeful Falcons offense. Isaiah Polamo, who spells the name different than his cousin Troy, but they are cousins, the dandruff hair guy, who also is pretty good safety as a side note. But anyway, Polamalu played 100% and had 9 tackles, 6 of which was solo to lead the team. Robert Spillane played his 98% on the low snap count, only had 7 tackles. Divine Diablo, only 66%. Once again, hopefully y'all haven't been playing him as we've been warning. Now, he had a more efficient game than he typically does with 7 tackles, 3 which were solo, tackle for loss, and a pass defense. So he was more productive than he typically is on that low snap count, but someone we're not chasing. Adam Butler. And, he is someone, I have to be honest, shame on me for not singing his praises earlier, on some of these shows. He's been very productive. Part of the reason I haven't brought him up, he's about 30 years old. He's out of Vanderbilt. He's bounced around some, but he's been really productive this year. In this game, he played a very nice 69% of the snaps, 6 tackles, 3 solo, sack, attack for loss, quarterback hit, pass defense. Apologies for not sharing more on him. He's someone, particularly if you're playing Barmore, Adam Butler is someone you can go grab in his place. If you lost Dexter Lawrence, go grab Adam Butler. He's a name you could play. Not willing to chase, but we're watching Jonah Laulu, Laulu. Probably butchered that name as well. He played 91% of the snaps as a defensive tackle. He was running all over the field, 6 tackles. He was hustling if you watch the game. 6 tackles, 4 solo, a sack, which means you got a tackle for loss, quarterback hit. He even got a pass defense as well. So we're watching him, not necessarily playing him, and it's more of a watch from a dynasty. He was a UDFA, if I'm remembering correctly. So we don't want to get too excited off of one game, particularly against the Falcons, but just someone to keep an eye on. All right, Max Crosby, injured. It was announced he was going to have surgery on that ankle and out for the year. We thought he was recovered from that ankle injury clearly while he was playing, and he got it back up to 100% of the snaps. Clearly wasn't 100%. Must have re-aggravated it and lost him for the rest of the year, unfortunately. So the most surprising thing of that happening from a playing time perspective is K'Lavon Chaisson from LSU played 98% of the snaps. So he basically played the same amount of snaps that Max Crosby played. And we talked about, is the light bulb finally going off for the number 1 draft pick, first-round draft pick? I believe it was number 19 overall that Jacksonville made when he out of LSU for Chase on. And look, he only had 4 tackles and 1 solo, but he was all over the field, and he was hustling, and deep leagues, maybe someone to take a chance on. The other interesting thing is Tyree Wilson, the previous number 1 draft pick of the Raiders, I believe was number 7 overall last year. He played 72% of the snaps, 5 solo, 3 tackles, 1 sack, a tackle for loss, and a quarterback hit. Now, the thing I have to remind you of on both Chason and Wilson is they had a sitting duck that they were going after in Kirk Cousins, and a Falcons offensive line that has been struggling as a result of that because of the way teams can attack, because Kirk Cousins was never leaving the pocket. So they knew where the target was going to constantly be. So that is the reminder on both Chason and Wilson. Wilson has, he's had, 1 or 2 good games, 1 or 2 kind of didn't show up kind of games in the last few weeks. Someone to keep an eye on if they're going to get, they're both someone we should keep an eye on if with Crosby being out and if they're going to play that many snaps. Okay. Trevin Moehrig played 100% of the snaps and did nothing basically. He played, I looked it up for you all, 22% snaps deep, which he should have more stats than that. That's just not very productive. I'll leave it at that. Nate Hobbs did return from injury, only played 55% of the snaps. Lastly, from the I Told You So department, last week, Darnay Holmes told you he was fool's gold. Don't go chasing those points when he only played 56% of the snaps. This week, no snaps on defense, no stats. Okay, so that wraps up the Raiders, and that wraps up all our divisions. So thank you all once again for tuning in. I plan to be here next week, but it is Christmas Eve, and I filmed this on Tuesday nights, and of course, Christmas is Wednesday morning. I have to be honest with you. I don't know right now exactly when the show's going to come out, particularly since my oldest son is flying into town with his wife, and so I'm going to be working around visiting and enjoying family. So I'll do my best to get you something. It'll probably be an abbreviated show, but if it's not there early on Wednesday morning, don't lose faith. I will try and get out something at some point, okay? So please join us at IDP Plus. And I, once again, earlier in the show, you heard all the great things we have, all the great shows on YouTube, on both this channel and on the Bets channel, the rankings, the tools, the articles, props. Use the code PROPS to get 20% off. With that, I'm going to say, be kind to one another, be safe. I do hope to see you at the Start Sit show on Sunday. Good luck in week 16, and a Merry Christmas and a Happy Holidays to all of you in case you don't join the show or aren't able to next week. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Thank you for watching the IDP Plus YouTube network. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Be sure to tap the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload new content.